Welcome to the Mortarboard, the administrator's source for solutions in higher education. We tell you about challenges other schools have faced, benchmark the problem, share their best practices and epic fails, and invite you to consider whether what worked for them might also work at your institution. Hosted by longtime college president Dr. Dan Barwick, this is the Mortarboard, the source for solutions in higher education.
Welcome to the Mortarboard, your source for solutions in higher education. I'm Dan Barwick. Welcome to the podcast. If the content of this podcast interests you, then you'll enjoy my new book, Risk and Reward: How Small Colleges Get Better Against the Odds. It's now available from Amazon in ebook, paperback, and audiobook format. The best way to find it is to head over to my blog, mortarboardblog.com, and click on the link on the front page. If you have any thoughts about the book, don't hesitate to send me an email and let me know what you think. Welcome to the 5th season of the Mortarboard. Here in our first episode of the season, we talk about remedial education. That may not sound exciting, but I don't think there's any topic in higher education that costs more money, yields fewer results, and is talked about less than remedial education. Remedial programs at all levels are typically designed to close the gap between what a student knows and what they are expected to know, and that's typically in math and reading courses in college. Many new college students are deemed to be underprepared or unprepared for the rigor of college-level study. And so college have developed remedial courses, once in a while called developmental education. Lest you think this is an isolated issue, the Brookings Institution estimates that up to 65% of community college students take at least one remedial course within 6 years of initial enrollment. I'm here to talk to you about remediation for two reasons. First, remediation costs money, a lot of money. Remediation is the hidden K-12 budget that we all pay. We normally think of the cost of our K-12 school district as being paid for through some combination of our local school district taxes and state taxes that we pay that are then redistributed. In fact, there's a third hidden cost to K-12, and that's remediation, where students enter college with a high school diploma, but the college decides they're really not done with high school. And so it places them into high school level courses that are designed to get them to the point where they're ready to enter college. The second issue is effectiveness. Study after study after study of remedial education shows clearly it is not the most effective way to educate new college students, regardless of their preparation level. To talk to me today about all things remedial is Dr. Katie Hearn, professor of English at Skyline College and co-founder of the California Acceleration Project, also known as CAP, which supports the state's 116 community colleges to transform remediation to increase student completion and equity. In 2016, the Washington Monthly named Dr. Hearn as one of the, quote, 16 most innovative people in higher education. We'll be talking to Professor Hearn today about her report, The Statewide AB 705 Update, Plans from California Community Colleges Suggest Notable Progress but Not Full Implementation. Professor Hearn, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Daniel. It's nice to be here.
Your report is sort of a progress update on changes to college remediation in California. Now, before we get into your findings, could you give our audience an overview of the legislation that forced change in California and why that legislation came about?
Sure. So in the California community college system, historically, about 80% of our students, when they would arrive at our open door institutions, would be required to take remedial courses in math, English, or both. And this was based on placement tests or standardized placement tests that research over the last decade has shown are really inaccurate and do not give us a good sense of what students are capable of. What also was happening was that Black and Hispanic students were disproportionately excluded from college level courses in English and math and required to take multiple remedial classes. You might think, well, that's fine because these classes are intended to help them and this is not a problem. But even though that was the intent of remedial courses, the research over the last decade has been unequivocal that taking remedial classes actually makes students less likely to make progress on their degree instead of helping them be more likely to make progress on their degree.
May I interrupt with a quick question?
Yes.
When you say it's disproportional for Blacks and Hispanics, do you mean disproportional to the tested abilities they have in those subjects or disproportional to other populations? I'm just trying to get a sense of the disproportion you're talking about.
Yeah. So compared to white students in particular, like at my former college, white students were twice as likely to be allowed to enroll directly in college composition than Black students. So they were disproportionately excluded from transferable college level English and math courses compared to white students. And this put them at a disadvantage when starting college. Like if you think about it, it starts to make sense because remedial courses don't earn credit toward a degree. So you're saying, and Black and Latino students in particular would have to take multiple of these classes. So they might be stuck in 2 years of repeating K-12 math and not earning any credit toward a degree. So the placement to be allowed to enroll directly in a college credit-bearing course was a really important equity issue that made a huge difference on their prospects of making progress in college.
Thank you. I interrupted you. Please continue.
Yeah, so because that was our status quo across the community college system, it became clear to a lot of people that we needed to change state policy. In 2017, the California legislature unanimously passed a law called AB 705. That did a couple of major things. One is it prevented colleges from relying on these standardized placement tests as the way to determine where students started in their English and math coursework. And then the second and probably more important thing that it did is it set a standard that students should begin in the class where they have the best chance to make progress toward a degree. Sort of simply stated, that a college couldn't require a student to take a remedial course unless they had the data to show that would make the student more successful in college instead of less successful. So that was, and that's really nationally in the US, that's a really transformative policy standard that I would expect a lot of states will follow in the coming years as we look at the impact it's had on student outcomes and equity.
Your report found to date that, quote, the California Community College's Chancellor's Office has not publicly identified any college that meets this standard for students enrolled in remedial classes. That's the end of the quote. Why is implementation so slow? Or to put it another way, why has implementation been unsuccessful?
I wouldn't say that it's been unsuccessful. This has been one of the most transformative higher education policies that I've ever seen. So statewide, and California Community College System is the largest system of higher education in the nation. We have 116 separate community colleges, almost 2 million students. And this change, even though we have some implementation cleanup that is needed, this change produced immediate huge gains for students. So in the first year of implementation, completion of college English increased from 49% to 67% in the first year compared to pre-AB 705. And in math, completion increased in 1 year from 26% to 50% statewide. So that was sort of unprecedented gains in completion based on one policy change. So that's the first thing I'd say is that it has been incredibly effective as a policy, but it has also been implemented in uneven ways across our decentralized system. I think the major reason for that is that many practitioners continue to believe that students benefit from remedial courses. That's why these courses were developed. That's been our status quo for decades. And so that belief is pretty deeply lodged inside people's consciousness. They just think, well, students are not ready for college. And if they take these remedial classes, they'll be better off. They'll do better in college. And, how could you go into a STEM field if your algebra prep is shaky or you don't retain a lot of it? So that these beliefs are so longstanding and deeply held that they can be data impervious. Like that the evidence has been unequivocal that that's not true, that students are much better off when they don't take remedial classes and when they're allowed to enroll directly in credit-bearing, degree-applicable English and math courses. And that's true. We've done a ton of research in California, and that's true for every group we've examined to date, including students with disabilities, low-income students, veterans, foster youth, Black, Hispanic, white, Asian students. Every group that we have studied is better off starting directly in a credit-bearing English and math course instead of a remedial one. So it's a belief that is in direct conflict with years of research, but it's a belief that persists. I mean, I think that we're talking about the human condition here, that's, we often continue to believe things that are not true if we believe them long enough and they're deeply held enough.
Well, your analysis found that, and now here I'm going to quote you again, 41% of colleges plan to continue remedial enrollments in violation of regulatory guidance from the state chancellor's office. As a result, implementation continues to be, as you say, uneven and inequitable. End quote. So why are nearly half planning to violate state policy? And let me put a fine point on it here. So is this a refusal? Is it the result of sort of these ingrained views that you're talking about? Do colleges feel it's unattainable? Or, I guess to put an even finer point on it, if students are not taking those remedial classes, and so therefore there are fewer credit hours being taken at a particular school, even if those classes don't count for college credit, are we talking about money here? Are schools losing revenue because of this? And if so, is that influencing their behavior?
Oh, those are really deep questions. I don't think revenue is as big of a driver as it might appear on the outside. And the reason for that is that we're still continuing to have students. And so instead of having students take remedial classes, we have them take transferable college level classes. So they're still going to be taking classes, and colleges are still going to be reimbursed from the state for that enrollment. So it's really a shifting of enrollment patterns rather than a loss of enrollment. I think, perhaps some math departments might see a decline in their enrollment because in the past, they used to be able to make students take as many as 5 courses, because they had 4 remedial ones plus the single transferable course they needed for their degree. Or if they're a STEM major, many more courses than that. So I think maybe there needs to be a right sizing of math departments around, well, how many sections of math do we need to serve the students we have? I don't think it's producing enrollment losses overall because the students are still taking classes. And because they don't have to take as many remedial classes, their schedules have more openings to take history or sociology or, their career ed classes or whatever their major is. So I don't think that revenue is really the driver here. I think the driver is a combination of these deeply held beliefs that students really need these remedial classes and that they don't belong in transferable college level classes, combined with power struggles inside the system where, sort of faculty believe, well, we get to say what students need. And administration can't tell us. We have the authority to determine the curriculum and the policies for students. And if you have a sort of a faculty that is entrenched enough in wanting to fight this, it can be harder for their administration to do something different. I mean, it's politically very contentious in a number of colleges, and that makes things hard in a system with shared governance like we have. It can kind of grind change to a halt, and I think that's why we needed legislation in the first place. Is that there are these beliefs that are driving practice that are not supported by data and that are not good for students, but the institutions have been sort of clinging to that status quo instead of making changes based on what would be better for students and what the evidence says. And so, in essence, the legislature had to come in and say, okay, that this is unacceptable, that this status quo where students are placed into classes that make them less likely to earn a degree and that is so racially unequitable, especially for Black and Hispanic students, that can't continue. We needed sort of clear, unequivocal state policy to force a shift in our huge, decentralized, politically contentious system.
Well, with nearly half planning to violate state policy, and I don't know if there's some sort of built-in penalty for violating the policy, but do you think that colleges will ever come around to this, or is there some permanent inconsistency that will result with a penalty that schools just absorb somehow?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think that one thing that helps is once a college has made these shifts and they see students doing much better, and once faculty have had the experience of teaching courses that are where they're not excluding everybody and they're letting students into these credit-bearing courses and learning how to support them better, then the changes start to have a sort of a positive cycle attached to it, where you can see students doing better and faculty feel like, oh, okay, I get how to do this. I understand, so that the changes, once they're in place, can help reinforce themselves. But if colleges are refusing to make the changes, then they don't get that boost of seeing, wow, this really works. This is that. And the major change I think that we need is to sort of, there are definitely students who come to community colleges less well prepared. I mean, that's just a fact of life. We accept 100% of students in the California community college system. So some of them are going to be really well prepared, and some of them are going to be middling prepared, and some of them are going to be less well prepared. Or maybe they had great preparation, but they also have great challenges, like they are dealing with learning issues, or they're dealing with economic insecurity or mental health challenges. So there are a lot of real, genuine challenges that our students face. But what is clear is that the way to support them is not remedial courses. Those were intended to support them, but we have to let go of the belief that works, because the evidence is overwhelming that it doesn't. And we can't identify a single group of students that does better starting in a remedial course. So I think that the mindset shift that needs to happen in our system, and I would say across the country actually, is that the best way to support underprepared students or struggling students is not blocking them from enrolling in transferable courses, but supporting them better inside those courses. And so there's a there's a way to do that called Co-Requisite Remediation. And just to give a kind of a clean example of that's for students who are coming in either that they want more support, or their high school grades or other measures indicate they need extra support, that they just take a higher unit version of the college level course. So in the classes I teach in the spring, I taught a 3-unit version of college composition, and I taught a 5-unit version of college composition. And at my college, Skyline College, students who have below a 2.6 high school GPA are referred to the 5-unit version because the evidence shows that they have lower success rates than students with higher GPAs. So we want to make sure that they're successful when we put them into a demanding college composition class. And then other students, even if they had a higher GPA, they can choose it if they feel like they want the 5 units of class, which has more class time to discuss the readings and more class time to sort of work on writing a good thesis statement or organizing your paper or doing peer review and getting feedback on your draft, like, more in-class writing activities to help them build content for their paper. That for students who need extra support, that's the best way to do it, is to enroll them in a college level course that has the same standards as a regular college level course. Like the readings are the same, the writing assignments are the same, but there's more in-class support to help them be successful. That's the paradigm shift that I think we're making in the California community college system. And many other states are also doing it as well. Georgia, Tennessee, is that we think, instead of thinking about like, you get into only some students are quote unquote ready for a college level course, we say all students begin in college level courses, but some get extra support. That's the shift. And I think once people can kind of get that and understand that and learn to teach in that way, I think some of the resistance will drop because we can see for ourselves how much more effective that is. The other thing I'd say to your question about are we looking at a future of permanent uneven implementation? I don't think so. And the reason is that right now the California legislature is considering follow-up legislation to sort of tighten up implementation of the original legislation, AB 705. That unanimously passed the California Assembly last month and will be considered by the Senate next. And the goal of that legislation is to sort of clarify for colleges what the intent of the law was and also close some of the loopholes that have been undermining implementation. So one of those major loopholes is that colleges interpreted the original legislation to say that they couldn't require remedial courses, but they could keep offering plenty of them. And they could also keep enrolling students or even recommending or steering students into those classes. Like a number of colleges in the system interpreted the language of the original law to only govern what they require of students and to not require that they actually enroll students in courses where they have the best chance of completion. And that was a pretty common misinterpretation of the law, that when the author of the legislation, Assemblymember Irwin, learned that was how colleges were interpreting it, she was like dumbfounded. That wasn't the intent. The intent is that the students actually enroll in the classes that give them the best chance of success, not, like have nominal access to these courses, but continue to be steered toward remedial classes. So AB 1705 tightens that up and clarifies some of the more gray areas of the original legislation. And I think that if it passes the Senate and is signed into law by our governor, I think we'll see much, much tighter implementation, because a number of colleges are still sort of clinging to this misinterpretation of the law and I think willing to sort of, see if they're really going to be held to the standard. I think there's a sort of a testing. It's like, well, what's going to happen to us if we don't? And then if this new legislation still doesn't improve implementation, I think, down the line, our state's going to need to look at turning off the funding for remedial classes. Just, close the tap on the funding. And because if our system can't identify a group of students that actually benefits from taking these courses, then we shouldn't be offering the courses, and we shouldn't be using public funding to do that.
Well, for my final question to you, I'd like to invite you to think theoretically about, say, 4 possible outcomes. From what you've described, I can immediately sort of foresee 4 outcomes sort of increase. Each one is more speculative than the last. So the first one would be student success, because you already spoke to the initial data that showed that there were a substantial number of students that the data suggested they really didn't need to be in remedial classes in the first place. And so they, in some sense, these students are shown to be at a higher level, a more successful level than they would have been thought of under the sort of the, I got to figure out how to say this right.
Remedial paradigm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you. Under the remedial paradigm. But a second consequence that it seems would surface over time would be lower cost for the student. If they're taking remedial classes but not receiving college credit, it would seem like it would have to extend their time in college and thus increase their cost.
Absolutely. That is absolutely true. And a number of studies have shown that and have dug into that. Yeah, it absolutely increased their time degree and costs of degree, including just the opportunity cost of, like lost wages from employment, of being just having to stay in school for longer. Yeah.
Well, a third consequence that I can sort of think of is, and I know this is definitely far more speculative. It's the question of the reputation of community colleges. When you have community colleges that, I've seen where fully half of the students are taking remedial courses, and there is this pervasive belief that that's absolutely necessary because the type of student who enrolls in a community college is more likely than not completely prepared for college. It would seem as if perhaps this would change the way people thought about community colleges.
Change it for the better?
Yes.
Or change it?
Yes. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. I meant they don't think of it as, the vast majority of students in a community college are enrolling in that college because they actually can't yet be successful in a college without remedial courses.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're naming there, Daniel, is a fundamental misunderstanding about community college students that is pretty pervasive, that there's this belief that community colleges only serve students who are really not prepared for college. The research in California and elsewhere makes clear that's not true. So it's about 2/3 of our students, I believe it is, have above a 2.6 high school GPA. And in English, that's the highest performing group. So I think these changes are forcing us to sort of flip our understanding of, well, how many underprepared students do we really have in community college? And it's way, way less than we thought under the old remedial paradigm. It's just way fewer.
Well, that's actually a nice segue then into the fourth sort of consequence that I'm thinking about, which isn't the reputation of community colleges, it's the reputation of the high schools. So if we have this belief that sort of, high schools produce huge numbers of students that despite the fact that they're graduating from high school, they are still somehow not prepared to succeed in college. If there's a vastly smaller number of those that go on to remedial coursework and are successful despite the fact that they didn't need any remedial coursework, it would seem as if one of the sort of beneficiaries would be the high school system, which there would be one less, I'm trying to think of the right word. There's sort of one less criticism to be levied there. Instead of saying, well, your high school, I'm going to make this up. So, 50% of your students need remediation when they go on to community college. Well, now all of a sudden it's a much smaller figure. And so the criticism of that high school loses a lot of its force.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I have, I've been in meetings like before, this would be probably 10 years ago. So before the legislation made these changes in California, we would sometimes have gatherings where the local high school faculty would come on campus and meet with the college faculty to talk about, well, how can we make sure our curricula are aligned and how can we make sure students are well prepared? And I remember being in one of those meetings and a high school teacher saying to us college professors, like, well, I really want my students to be prepared. Tell me what I need to do. I really want them to be prepared. And my college was requiring 80% of students to start in remedial English at that time. And I sort of said, because I was seeing the data, this is, maybe it wasn't a decade ago. It was maybe about 8 years ago when the research on high school GPA as more predictive than standardized tests was really starting to come forward. And I said to her, I was like, don't take that on. Like, you actually are preparing students pretty well. Like, that the problem is our structures. It's not your work. And I think that that's a really hard thing for a lot of people to get their heads around, because this notion that high schools are not preparing students is so widespread that it doesn't even need evidence to support it, because the evidence says something else. High schools are doing a much better job preparing students than we have given them credit for, than our systems have given them credit for. And that even the students who are coming out with less strong preparation are not served by remedial classes, that's not the solution to helping them. So we can continue to work with our high school partners around, strengthening the handoff, making sure that, that students are as well prepared as they possibly can be. But for those students who are going to come out with less strong preparation, which might not even be the fault of the high school, it might be that they were housing insecure, and that they jumped around from high school to high school and missed a lot of class. Like, they might be really bright students, really capable students dealing with, mental health challenges or housing challenges or economic instability, food insecurity, like that's not the fault of the high school teachers either. So I think it requires us to shift off of those old assumptions that high schools aren't preparing them, remedial classes are the solution, and to say, no, we need to make sure our systems are better supporting students to be successful, and that's our institutional responsibility as colleges.
Well, that's a fascinating point you make about other reasons why students, may be unsuccessful. All of us who are teachers have had sort of the experience of a student who, if you can figure out a way to remove some sort of ancillary stressor from their lives, they become very different students, much more successful.
Yep.
I've been talking to Dr. Katie Hearn, professor of English at Skyline College and co-founder of the California Acceleration Project. In 2016, the Washington Monthly named Dr. Hearn as one of the 16 most innovative people in higher education. You can follow her on Twitter at Katie Hearn CA. That's at Katie Hearn CA. Professor Hearn, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, Daniel. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for joining me. Please feel free to email me with questions, comments, or suggestions for content that you'd like to hear about. You can reach me at mortarboardpodcast@gmail.com. Consider stopping by my blog, mortarboardblog.com. The blog contains links to stories